Good evening, everyone. Welcome to class 56 on the Adrianople period. Last week, we discussed the journey to Adrianople in the period in Constantinople. But the period tonight is, we're not going to go over the writings of Adrianople. That will be the class after this. This will be, I think, on the 16th, I believe it is. But I will send you an invitation to that. Tonight, we're going to look at what is really a very dramatic story. I mean, of course, it's told by "And God Passes By." It's told by Bahá'u'lláh and Baha'u'lláh, the King of Glory. It's also discussed by Tahirzadeh in the revelation of Baha'u'lláh and so on. So there are all kinds of places you have access to it, but I've tried tonight to put it in a dramatic form so you can see the plot, the bare bones outline of the plot itself, because it really is, it really would make a tremendous novel or a tremendous movie for that matter, but of course we can't do that because we don't portray the figure of Baha'u'lláh, who's kind of crucial to this story. So let's begin. I'm going to be mostly reading to you about it. We may go a little over the 45-minute usual period, may not, but if we do, just stick with me and we'll have time for a Q&A afterward. So let me share my screen and go to the slide. So class 56, the dramatic story of Adrianople. We begin with just an overview of where he stayed, because each house has a different part to play in the plot itself as it unfolds. And so the first house is the one they move into after they have temporary abode in the cold of winter in a house not fit to endure this hideously cold winter they were experiencing. But the first house he moves to is the house of Amrullah, at least that's the title he gives it, which means the house of God's command. And in as much as this 4-year period is highlighted by the fact that Baha'u'lláh gives what we're going to call his third and fourth declarations of his station. It's a very appropriate title for the house. So what happens in that house? Well, he begins writing the letters to the kings and rulers and the continuous revelation of other tablets as well. But then almost a year after they arrive, the days of stress commence. Now, what are they? Well, we're going to discuss that. When those days come to a climax, he instigates the most great separation and withdraws to the house of Rida Big. And that's the house, the picture of which you saw on the invitation, and I'll show it again tonight when we get to that point of the story. So he withdraws for 2 months, will not see any friends or anybody else. His family is with him, of course. And we'll see the reason for that. It's a very important strategic move. He stays after this 2-month period for about a year, and again continues to reveal more epistles to the kings, the rulers, and other governments. Finally, he moves after that year to the house of Isa, which is the house he stays in until the remainder of the Adrianople period. The period is marked by an incredible, just an amazing outpouring of announcements of his revelation to the world. The Guardian describes it in beautiful terms, as we will see. And he opens up, and this is sort of, if you will, the denouement of this story, is that you, by the end of this period, you have the full scope and significance of the revelation is unleashed not only to the world, but also the believers who until this point did not really understand that this was a separate religion. Not all of them did, but that this was sort of the continuation of what the Bab had revealed. And so they still considered themselves Babis, or had until this dramatic story is finished. So the storyline opens with the actions and effects of the open rebellion of Mirza Yahya. And again, you will remember that backing Mirza Yahya and inciting him to do these things, or at least the main instigator of his plot, is Syed Muhammad of Isfahan. And this is where shortly into the first year, the days of stress begin. Well, what are stressful about those days? The first is, of course, the backbiting by Mirza Yahya and Syed Muhammad of Isfahan to the authorities and to everyone else is going on all the time. So in other words, that is stressful enough by itself. But it's marked by this incredible story whereby Mirza Yahya invites Baha'u'lláh to his house, and after discussing various poisons and so on to get some knowledge of it, he puts this poison on the cup of the teacup that Baha'u'lláh is to drink from, and Baha'u'lláh is poisoned. During the fall or winter of 1864, Mirza Yahya poisons Baha'u'lláh. And then we have this wonderful story of the doctor who sacrificed his life to cure Baha'u'lláh. In what sense did he sacrifice his life? And the end result is that Baha'u'lláh is ill for a month and left for the rest of his life with a trimmer in his hand, which I showed you last week, the distinction between his handwriting prior to that and the trimmer in his handwriting afterward. I think I did. If I didn't, we will see it in the next class because that's already prepared, where we'll look at the major tablets. So here's the story. Let me have my tea early tonight. Desperate designs to poison Baha'u'lláh and his companions and thereby reanimate his own defunct leadership began approximately a year after their arrival in Adrianople to agitate his mind. Well aware of the erudition of his half-brother, Aki Kalim, and that's Mirza Musa, in matters pertaining to medicine, he, Mirza Yahya, under various pretexts, sought enlightenment from him regarding the effects of certain herbs and poisons, and then began, contrary to his wont, to invite Baha'u'lláh to his home, where one day, having smeared his teacup with a substance he had concocted, he succeeded in poisoning him sufficiently to produce a serious illness, which lasted no less than a month, and which was accompanied by severe pains and a high fever, the aftermath of which, as we just said, left Baha'u'lláh with a shaking hand till the end of his life. So grave was his condition that a foreign doctor named Shishman was called to attend him. The doctor was so appalled by his livid hue that he deemed his case hopeless, and after having fallen at his feet, retired from his presence without prescribing a remedy. A few days later, that doctor fell ill and died. Prior to his death, Baha'u'lláh had intimated that Dr. Shishman had sacrificed his life for him, for Baha'u'lláh. To Mirza Jan, sent by Baha'u'lláh to visit him, the doctor had stated that God had answered his prayers and that after his death, a certain Dr. Shubhan, whom he knew to be reliable, should, whenever necessary, be called in his stead. Now, this is a very mysterious thing, and there's more to it that we don't have time to go into. But the idea, obviously, is somewhat parallel in my mind to the sacrifice that will occur in Akka when Mirza Mehdi, the younger son of Baha'u'lláh, falls through the skylight to his death, And his death is deemed a sacrifice because in his dying words, he told Baha'u'lláh, let my life be a ransom for those who wish to see you. And sure enough, the doors of Akka became open to visitors. The idea of this from a spiritual perspective is that Baha'u'lláh had within his power the ability to cure Mirza Midi. And Mirza Midi instead preferred to make this sacrifice in order to promote the cause and assist the believers. And Baha'u'lláh accepted that sacrifice as it was offered and wrote some very plaintive epistles about the gift he had given to God of this most precious possession of his son. It's very touching, and we'll get to that when we get to Akka. He then, Mirza Yahya, attempted to kill Baha'u'lláh once more. He even had gradually and with great circumspection disclosed to one of the companions, Ustad Muhammad Ali Salamani, the barber on whom he had lavished great marks of favor, his wish that he, on some propitious occasion, when attending Baha'u'lláh in his bath, should assassinate him. So enraged was Ustad Muhammad Ali, Aki Kalim Mirza Musa recounted this episode to Nabil in Adrianople, has stated when apprised of this proposition that he, the barber, felt a strong desire to kill Mirza Yahya on the spot and would have done so but for his fear of Baha'u'llah's displeasure. And of course, this would have been his displeasure. Baha'u'lláh did not want the Baha'is or to kill anyone or to take revenge on anyone. So when that does happen later in Akka, when 7 Babis or Baha'is kill Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan, it causes great trouble for Baha'u'lláh, and he denounces it soundly and denounces the 7 who did that soundly, even though some of them remained faithful and were forgiven eventually. So Baha'u'llah's wisdom in protecting the cause. Yeah, so in other words, even though all this is going on, Baha'u'lláh tries not to divulge these things to anyone because he doesn't want to, he doesn't want it to appear to the people in Adrianople, particularly the authorities, that there's any schism or conflict within the Babi community. This is from Shoghi Effendi. Though ordered subsequently by Baha'u'lláh not to divulge this occurrence to anyone, the barber was unable to hold his peace and betrayed the secret, plunging thereby the community into great consternation, because part of them still thought that, well, Mirza Yahya is the nominee of the Bab, and could this really be happening, that Baha'u'llah's own brother, whom Baha'u'lláh had raised as a son, be trying to kill him? So you have this great turmoil within the community, as Baha'u'lláh had feared. Baha'u'lláh himself affirms he disclaimed such an intention and imputed it to that same servant, Ustad Muhammad Ali. In other words, he said that the barber couldn't hold his peace, and he attributed the confession of that, or really the gossip about it, to the rest of the community. So this is where things begin to come to a head. Now, so in other words, the days of stress are the continual accusations by Mirza Muhammad Ali and Mirza Yahya to the government that Baha'u'lláh is taking their supplies from them, not giving them enough food, and so on. A whole compilation of lies. And these 2 attempts on his life. There were other attempts as well. So at the end of his forbearance regarding this vicious half-brother, the moment had now arrived for him who had so recently, both verbally and in numerous tablets, revealed the implications of the claims he had advanced, to acquaint formally the one who was the nominee of the Bab with the character of his mission. In other words, the time had come from Baha'u'lláh to speak directly to Mirza Yahya, as if he didn't know already, because after all, Mirza Yahya was in Baghdad when Baha'u'lláh declared his station, his mission. So this is sort of the third declaration, if you will, the declaration in secret in the Siachal in 53, then the declaration in 63 in the Garden of Rizwan, and now he declares himself directly to Mirza Qajan with the Suramir, again, like the House of Amir, command, the Surah of command. And basically the tablet says, I am the promised one, promised by the Bab, which unmistakably affirmed those claims to read aloud to him its contents and demand an unequivocal and conclusive reply. In other words, he was challenging Mirza Yahya to say, okay, either you're with me or you are not. If you're not, then say so. If you are, then say so. So what happens to the response? There is, in effect, as I say in the title of this slide, no more grace for Mirza Yahya. Baha'u'lláh has been forgiving and forbearing. He has been constantly disobeyed by Mirza Yahya. Terrible things Mirza Yahya did to the family when Baha'u'lláh was in the mountains of Suleymaniye, just grotesque things. And why and how Baha'u'lláh allowed such forbearance or carried out such forbearance is very clear. He didn't want the community to be torn apart. And so he accommodated him as much as was possible, but now things had come to a crossroads. He had to establish the Baha'i faith as a religion distinct from and succeeding that of the Bab, and that he was the one the Bab had foretold. So in this tablet from Mirza Yahya, he presented him with a formal announcement to the nominee of the Bab of the station of him whom God shall make manifest, summoning him to pay allegiance to his cause. So he didn't just say yes or no. He said, you must follow me if you're going to follow the writings of the Bab. And this, we will discuss next time, is one of the meanings of the Tablet of Ahmad. And that is, well, we'll get to that when we get to it. Let me not get sidetracked. So what is Mirza Yahya's response? Mirza Yahya's request for a one-day respite during which he could meditate his answer was granted. The only reply, however, that was forthcoming was a counter declaration specifying the hour and the minute in which he, Mirza Yahya, had been made the recipient of an independent revelation himself, necessitating the unqualified submission to him of the peoples of the earth in both the East and the West. I need not add any embellishment to the severe nature of this claim, and the fact that whenever anyone tried to approach him with, where's your revelation, reveal something, he failed miserably. And that will be really the climax of this story, and you'll see why. So this introduced the days of stress. Now, this is where Baha'u'lláh takes explicit action to separate himself from Mirza Yahya and anyone who wished to follow Mirza Yahya. And strategically, it was a brilliant move. What he did, as you will see when I read it, he separated himself from all of the followers. And you'll see that in the next slide. But let me describe here from the Guardian's description in God Passes By, what is called the Yam-e-Shedan, the days of stress. The monstrous behavior of Mirza Yahya, the nominee of the Bab and recognized chief of the Babi community, brought in its wake a period of travail which left its mark on the fortunes of the faith for no less than half a century. This supreme crisis Baha'u'lláh himself designated as the Yam Shaddad, during which the most grievous veil was torn asunder and the most great separation was irrevocably effected. It immediately gratified and emboldened its external enemies, both civil and ecclesiastical, played into their hands, and evoked their unconcealed derision. So what is the most great separation? Well, first, I want to show you again the picture I showed you last time, but now we focus on the active subversion of this figure, Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan. Strange, is it not, how they all seem to be looking at him and he's trying to look away, it looks like, rather than at the camera. Now, you might wonder, well, who's taking these pictures? Because some of them are very clear and very good pictures. The fact is they were made to pose for the government photographers sort of as a passport to identify them. So if they went anywhere else, they could say, here are the people you need to watch out for. So when, if ever, you get to see the picture of Baha'u'lláh, which is usually reserved for Baha'is when they visit the Holy Land on pilgrimage, to see the picture firsthand, there are some available, but they're distorted. The clarity is not good. You see a look of absolute power and sternness. And the reason is that picture, as well as the pictures you most commonly see of Abdu'l-Baha and Mirza Mehdi together, were taken in 1868 as they were being exiled. They were, again, sort of passport photos to identify who is who. And so they're not happy because they are about to be sent to a penal colony from which no one usually survives. So the result of this division on the community, it brought incalculable sorrow to Baha'u'lláh, visibly aged him, and inflicted through its repercussions the heaviest blow ever sustained by him in his lifetime. So this includes the bastinado when he was on the way to Fort Tabarsi, the imprisonment in the Siachal, the long journey to Samsun, and the even more grievous journey in the dead of winter, the 12-day journey from Constantinople to Adrianople, as well as all the afflictions that had been inflicted on him by Mirza Yahya that caused him to go to the mountains. It was engineered throughout by the tortuous intrigues and incessant machinations of that same diabolical Sayyid Muhammad. And Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan then is deemed the principal villain of the Baha'i faith, the Antichrist, as the Guardian calls him. That vile whisperer who, disregarding Baha'u'llah's advice, had insisted on accompanying him to Constantinople and Adrianople, and was now redoubling his efforts with unrelaxing vigilance to bring it to a head. So here is the most great separation. And this is the, again, incredible ingenuity on the part of Baha'u'lláh, which we, of course, would expect from a manifestation. But just from a strategic point of view, it's quite clever, if you will. So presumptuous an assertion made by so perfidious an adversary to the envoy of the bearer of so momentous a revelation. And here it's referring to Mirza Yahya's assertion that he was the one whom the Bab had promised, and he had a revelation that he had just received, was the signal for the open and final rupture between Baha'u'lláh and Mirza Yahya. So in other words, in spite of what this trouble this would bring about for the community and how it would look for the authorities, Baha'u'lláh said it could be no more. It could not stand. a rupture that marks one of the darkest dates in Baha'i history. Wishing to allay the fierce animosity that blazed in the bosom of his enemies and to assure to each one of the exiles a complete freedom to choose between him and them, Baha'u'lláh withdrew with his family to the house of Rida Beg on March 10, 1866, which was rented by his order, and he refused for 2 months to associate with either friend or stranger, including his own companions. Now, the strategic ingenuity of this results from the fact that, no, I'm not going to coerce you into following me instead of my half-brother. I'm not going to denounce him. I'm going to go away. The decision falls on your shoulders. You decide what you're going to do. And so this is an amazing thing. And it's always the case with Baha'u'lláh, that he gives us as much free will as is possible in both the laws that he reveals and in the actions he has us undertake. This is the house as refurbished by the Baha'i community of Rida Beg, to which he departed when during this 2-month separation. And as you remember, I said he stays there for a full year from that point. Here's another strategic thing he did. It's very symbolic because they didn't have much. They had only brought with them what they could put in ox carts and so forth in that 12-day miserable trip from Constantinople to Adrianople. But nevertheless, as a symbolic gesture, he instructed Mirza Musa, Aki Kalem, to divide all the furniture, bedding, clothing, and utensils that were to be found in his home, Baha'u'llah's home, and send half to the house of Mirza Yahya to deliver to him certain relics he had long coveted, he being Mirza Yahya, such as the seals, rings, and manuscripts in the handwriting of the Bab, and to ensure that he received his full share of the allowance fixed by the government for the maintenance of the exiles and their families. He moreover directed Aki Kalem to order to attend Mirza Yahya's shopping for several hours a day, any one of the companions whom he himself might select, and to assure him that whatever would henceforth be received in his name from Persia would be delivered into his own hands. So again, a symbolic gesture. He moves away, makes everyone choose, divides everything in half. Again, whom do you want to follow? Mirza Yahya or me? That day, Aki Kalem is reported to have informed Nabil. And again, Nabil, remember, is the historian, and that's why everybody tells Nabil, because they know he's taking down everything that's occurring, and they know that this will be the history of the faith. Witnessed a most great commotion. All the companions lamented in their separation from the Blessed Beauty. Those days, that is when they discovered that he was remote and would not see them or anyone. Those days, is the written testimony of one of those companions, were marked by tumult and confusion. We were sore perplexed and greatly feared lest we be permanently deprived of the bounty of his presence. Excuse me. The grief and perplexity were, however, destined to be of short duration. The calumnies with which both Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad now loaded their letters, which they disseminated in Persia and Iraq, as well as the petitions couched in obsequious language, which the former had addressed to Khurshid Pasha, the governor of Adrianople, and to his assistant Aziz Pasha, impelled Baha'u'lláh to emerge from his retirement. Now you have another wonderful part of this story. It's really sort of the climax. He was soon after informed that this same brother had dispatched one of his wives to the government house to complain that her husband had been cheated of his rights and that her children were on the verge of starvation, an accusation that spread far and wide and, reaching Constantinople, became to Baha'u'llah's profound distress the subject of excited discussion and injurious comment in circles that had previously been greatly impressed by the high standard which his noble and dignified behavior had set in that city. So this is why, on the one hand, it's a great day. It's the emergence of the faith, and yet it's a birth that goes through the pangs of the lowering of the opinion of the townspeople about Baha'u'llah himself, about the faith, about a schism in the faith, and ultimately results in their being exiled to Akka. Further attacks on Baha'u'llah. Sayyid Muhammad journeyed to the capital, begged the Persian ambassador, the Musharraf Dali, to allot Mirza Yahya and himself a stipend, accused Baha'u'llah of sending an agent to assassinate Nasiruddin Shah, and spared no effort to heap abuse and calumny on the one who had for so long and so patiently forborne with him and endured in silence the enormities of which he had been guilty. Now, here is the climax that I was just mentioning. This is the great debate that never happened. It's a wonderful story. So on your own, read every aspect of it, because there's a lot of it that I could not have time to include here. After a stay of about 1 year in the house of Rida Beg, Baha'u'llah returned to the house he had occupied before his withdrawal from his companions. And thence, after 3 months, he transferred his residence to the house of Isa Akka, in which he continued to live until his departure from Adrianople. It was in this house, in the month of September 1867, that an event of the utmost significance occurred, which completely discomfited Mirza Yahya and his supporters and proclaimed to friend and foe alike Baha'u'llah's triumph over them. And this is a story unto itself. A certain Mir Muhammad, a Babi of Shiraz, greatly resenting alike the claims and the cowardly seclusion of Mirza Yahya, succeeded in forcing Sayyid Muhammad to induce Mirza Yahya to meet Baha'u'llah face to face so that a discrimination might be publicly effected between the true and the false. So in other words, they had been made to choose. Now there would be a public confrontation in which they would have some debate or be asked to prove who was the correct successor, the one that the Bab had promised him, whom God would make manifest. Foolishly assuming that his illustrious brother would never countenance such a proposition, because after all, it would mean that the manifestation of God would walk through the streets and meet at a town square and confront Mirza Yahya in an open debate. Mirza Yahya appointed the mosque of Sultan Salim as the place for their encounter. So it's ready to go. Now, what happens that I don't cover here, that, well, it is said here, but not all of it, because as he goes through the streets, because Baha'u'llah says, okay, let's do it. He sings and chants a poem, and the poem and the song he sings are in, I don't think they're in God Passes By, but they're in Balyuzi's book. And it is delightful. So, I mean, Baha'u'llah is elated. No sooner had Baha'u'llah been informed of this arrangement than he set forth on foot in the heat of midday and accompanied by the same Mir Muhammad for the aforementioned mosque, which was situated in a distant part of the city, reciting as he walked through the streets and market verses in a voice and in a manner that greatly astonished those who saw and heard him. Those are the verses I'm talking about. Upon his return to his house, Baha'u'llah revealed a tablet that Mirza Yahya didn't show, wherein he recounted what had happened, fixed the time for the postponed interview, sealed the tablet with his seal, entrusted it to Nabil, and instructed him to deliver it to one of the new believers, Mullah Muhammadi Tabrizi, for the information of Sayyid Muhammad, who was in the habit of frequenting that believer's shop. It was arranged to demand from Sayyid Muhammad, ere the delivery of that tablet, a sealed note pledging Mirza Yahya, in the event of failing to appear at the trysting place, to affirm in writing that his claims were false. So in other words, either show up or send a letter saying that I was wrong, I'm really not the new manifestation. Sayyid Muhammad promised that he would produce the next day the document required, and though Nabil for 3 successive days waited in that shop for the reply, neither did Sayyid appear, nor was such a note sent by him. That undelivered tablet, Nabil, recording 23 years later, this historic episode in his chronicle, affirms was still in his possession, as fresh as the day on which the Most Great Branch had pinned it, and the seal of the ancient beauty had sealed and adorned it, a tangible and irrefutable testimony to Baha'u'llah's established ascendancy over a routed opponent. So they neither responded nor did they show up. And that was it, basically. That sort of ended, it doesn't end the dramatic story of Adrianople, but it is the finished product, more or less, of Baha'u'llah's official banishment of Mirza Yahya. That's the real climax, and that occurs here. Baha'u'llah's reaction to this most distressful episode in his ministry was, as already observed, characterized by acute anguish. He who for months and years, he laments, I reared with the hand of loving kindness, hath risen to take my life. The cruelties inflicted by my oppressors, he wrote, in an allusion to these perfidious enemies, have bowed me down and turned my hair white. Shouldst thou present thyself before my throne, thou wouldst fail to recognize the ancient beauty, for the freshness of his countenance is altered, and its brightness hath faded, by reason of the oppression of the infidels. By God, he cried out, no spot is left on my body that hath not been touched by the spears of thy machinations. And again, excuse me. And again, thou hast perpetrated against thy brother, again, continuing his statement about Mirza Yahya, what no man hath perpetrated against another. What hath proceeded from thy pen, he furthermore has affirmed, hath caused the countenance of glory to be prostrated upon the dust, hath rent in twain the veil of grandeur in the sublime paradise, and lacerated the hearts of the favored ones established upon the loftiest seats. So not only the followers on earth and Baha'u'llah, but those in the afterlife have been, their hearts have been broken by what you have done. And yet in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, and this is, again, I know I've strayed from the plot here, but this shows the true nature not only of Baha'u'llah, but of the law of God, that so long as you return to God with sincerity, you will be forgiven for your sins. This is an incredible Baha'i principle. And so in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, as we will see when we get to 1873, when it reveals the Aqdas, I forgiving Lord assures this same brother this source of perversion, from whose own soul the winds of passion had risen and blown upon him, to fear not because of thy deeds, bids him return unto God, humble, submissive, and lowly, and affirms that he will put away from thee thy sins, and that thy Lord is the forgiving, the mighty, the all-merciful. Now that's not all he says, because he goes on to say, and yet it is you who needs God. God can well do without you. So he's forgiving, but he says, you know, you're forgiven only if you are sincere in your desire to be forgiving. So this reminds one, or should, of the very oft-repeated hidden word that says, where God says to us, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant. And of course, that means God is ever willing to give us love, forgiveness, but it is up to us, to use a very plebeian analogy, to pick up the receiver and his phone call to us. Sorry, that's such a lousy analogy, but I can't think of a good one at the moment. But in other words, it is up to us to respond to God's continuous outpouring of love, of forgiveness, of assistance. The most, now this is the cleansing effects of expelling Mirza Yahya from the cause, because this is what Baha'u'lláh does. And I had hinted at that 3 slides ago, but this is where it occurs. The most great idol had, at the bidding and through the power of him who is the fountainhead of the most great justice, been cast out of the community of the most great name, confounded, abhorred, and broken. And ultimately, of course, he was, a year or so later, sent to Cyprus, where he spent the remainder of his life and isolated from any of his, well, not any of his followers, but certainly isolated and with no authority whatsoever. Cleansed from this pollution, and this is the denouement of the story, if you will. This is the happy ending. Cleansed from this pollution, delivered from this horrible possession, God's infant faith could now forge ahead, and despite the turmoil that had convulsed it, demonstrate its capacity to fight further battles, capture loftier heights, and win mightier victories. That's beautiful writing, isn't it? And so this is some of the signs of this happy ending, if you will, are the fact that this is when the Baha'i faith becomes known as the Baha'i faith, and the followers of Mirza Yahya, or the people of the Bayan, are the Babis. So henceforth, wherever you see in the writings of Baha'u'lláh the phrase, the people of the Bayan, it will be in a pejorative manner. That is, he is talking to those who are still following the Bab, even though the Bab said, when he whom God will make manifest appears, you should not follow the Bayan, because I tell you to follow him. This is one of the keys to understanding the tablet of Ahmad. From this point on, Baha'u'lláh employs in his writing the phrase, the people of Baha, to refer to his followers, or the Baha'is of Baha, and the people of the Bayan to distinguish them from his followers. They were also called, particularly those who had followed Mirza Yahya were called Azalis, because his title given him by the Bab was Subi Azal, the morn of eternity. It was in this period that the greeting Allahu Abha superseded the old salutation of Allahu Akbar, and was simultaneously adopted in Persia and Adrianople, the first to use it in the former country at the suggestion of Nabil being Mullah Muhammad Ifurugi, one of the defenders, excuse me, one of the defenders of Fort Sheikh Tabarsi. So here's the conclusion of the story. A temporary breach had admittedly been made in the ranks of its supporters. Its glory had been eclipsed, and its annals stained forever. Its name, however, could not be obliterated. Its spirit was far from broken, nor could this so-called schism tear its fabric asunder. The covenant of the Bab, to which reference has already been made, with its immutable truths, incontrovertible prophecies, and repeated warnings, stood guard over that faith, ensuring its integrity, demonstrating its incorruptibility, and perpetrating its influence. And remember this slide and this statement when we go over the tablet of Ahmad, because if you remember, part of it is a statement by Baha'u'lláh about, remember Ali to whose commands we all are turning. Well, one of those commands of Ali, that is Sayyid Ali Muhammad, the Bab, is to follow him whom God will make manifest when he appears. So next time, Wednesday, February the 16th, 2 weeks from tonight, we will have the glorious outpouring from the Most Great Pen, the third and fourth declarations. Well, we just discussed the third one, the declaration to Mirza Yahya. And the fourth, which is, and these are my own designations, they're not official, which is to the world at large in numerous tablets. The relevance to current events, and this is something I am working on right now in a book that I hope to have out by next year, which analyzed the Suri Hakel, the book, the major tablet in the collection called The Summons of the God, the Lord of Hosts. And the Suri Hakel is one of the tablets revealed in Adrianople, and it is very relevant to what is going on right now in the world for reasons that we will get into. The offering of the Most Great Peace, and this, of course, in the early letters, such as the first letter to Napoleon, and some of the earlier letters, he says, you can have the Most Great Peace right now if you will do the things that I guide you to do. And among them was to stop overtaxing your people, to retain only such arms as are necessary for keeping the peace, to concoct a pact among all of your fellow, the leaders of your other nations, to implement the system of collective justice. And that system is very simple. Should any nation arise against another nation, all the other nations will combine to crush that nation. And of course, you see now the relevance of this discussion because we have the threat of Russia invading the Ukraine. It's already taken over the Crimea. And if the system of Baha'u'lláh were employed, all the other nations, not just in the NATO pact, but all over the world, would come to the rescue of Ukraine and crush Russia should they invade. And they would be deterred, obviously, by the threat of such a response. And of course, there is talk of sanctions and so on. So we'll go into that more inclusively later. But you see how these tablets were saying, all you have to do is do this right now, and you have the Most Great Peace in your hands now. But by the time he writes to Queen Victoria, he says, now that you have rejected the Most Great Peace, in other words, it was clear that no one but Queen Victoria gave any sort of positive response to these letters. And her response was a quote from the biblical text of Acts, which says, if it be of God, it will endure. If it is not, it can do no harm. I'll give you the full passage next time. So that's a very positive response in one sense. She's not saying, I believe you or I'll follow you, but she examines it enough to see that it's not attempting to usurp her power or anything. And she, in effect, recognizes the spiritual nature of it. So Baha'u'lláh says, you've rejected the Most Great Peace, and now you're going to have go and attain the lesser peace, but only after you go through great turmoil, which is discussed at length in the book, The Promised Day Has Come by Shoghi Effendi. The forebodings of the tempest that would be required are mentioned in these letters, some very specific things, such as the letter to Kaiser Wilhelm, in which he talks about the banks of the Rhine being covered in gore, and sees that occurring twice, foreshadowing the First and Second World Wars. And some very interesting things we'll discuss next time about clues that Baha'u'lláh gives in these letters that he's not some strange, insane individual writing some crank letter to these. He gives them clues that he knows things about them that no human being would be able to know. See if in the meantime, as you go through some of those letters, you can spot what they are. It's fun to find them. And you think, oh my goodness, if I were this person and I got that letter, I would stop in my tracks and think real carefully before I throw this behind my back, which is the phrase Baha'u'lláh uses repeatedly, meaning just tossing it away, throwing the trash, ignoring it. So, my friends, the Qibla is before us and the end of our formal presentation is at hand.